This was called a Horch, Horch, in a bright canary yellow cabriolet, which means open, okay? Running around in this village, you know. Look how we're dressed. My mother is driving this.
What was it like to live as a young Jewish girl in Germany for the brief period of democracy and peace just after World War I and before it all came to a sudden end? Helga Lustig remembers.
Nothing that they couldn't do. They were, they were of course conscripted to the military in the First World War, like my father was. But they could become doctors, they could become lawyers, they could become architects, were very big in the arts and the sciences, and there were only 1% of Germany were Jews. Only 1%. But they made Germany, they made Berlin, was an exciting city because of Jews, you know. And
Helga's mother carefully chronicled those years in a photo album where her beautiful family of 3 girls grew up in an ideal setting. Attending a regular public school, the girls enjoyed a childhood filled with summer retreats, family gatherings, and even a chauffeured car that took them around. But most of all, they lived as Jews in their community and had all doors of opportunity open to them, just like everyone else.
We could do everything. We could go to school, we could go and study to be a doctor, we could do the sciences or art or music and excel in all of them, or build a factory. We could do, at least that was when I was born, and I realized that was only a short time maybe, but it was good to be in Germany.
For a brief period in the 1920s, after the First World War, it was a good time to be in Germany, even if you were Jewish. In 1919, the German women got the right to vote and played a significant role in German politics, especially since so many of the men had died during World War I. Under the Weimar Republic, Germany's first experiment in democracy, a short period of stability followed. Described as the Golden Period, Berlin drew intellectuals, poets, artists, and jazz musicians from around the world.
Artists, famous writers, Jewish writers. We made a real splash in Germany as Jews. Never saying we were not, we personally, my families, did never say that they were Jewish. Beautiful synagogues were built.
It was a peace that would not last long. The Jewish scientists who were getting Nobel Prizes and excelling in all scientific fields were already on the alert to leave Germany and Austria before it was too late. And while the economic stability was waning with inflation and unpaid loans, the public took refuge in the infamous cabarets. Outside the nightclubs and the music scene, the arts flourished in an atmosphere of enlightened liberalism. New art movements, German Expressionism and Dadaism, took hold of a country still reeling from the catastrophic effects of World War I. The horrendous war imagery played out repeatedly in the works of a cynical breed of new painters. Realist artists like Kathy Kollwitz displayed the growing desperation of a hungry and destitute population. Far from city life, Helga and her family were enjoying a few quiet years of prosperity. In their idyllic country life at Elwick, her father had launched a very successful linen production company that employed most of the villagers.
My father built up this factory from scratch in an area outside of the Harz Mountains, at the bottom of the Harz Mountains. How he did that, I don't know, but some people helped him to lend him money, and he told everybody, look, because it was a lot of farmland and so on, and mostly people own their homes, so I said, stay put, find something to eat. If we succeed, you'll succeed. Well, they succeeded beyond all dreams. I mean, this factory became really well known. Never a denial that we were Jewish. On the high holidays, we would go to the next city, Nordhausen, and they had a very Orthodox synagogue with the women upstairs and the men downstairs. And my mother always would make fun of it and wave, to my father down below and stuff like that. Never a denial that we were Jewish. We never did that.
Believing in a healthy outdoor life, the family enjoyed yearly trips to numerous European resorts.
We used to go on long, I don't know what you call it in English actually, hikes. Let's first see how you do without the medicines, and just lie in the sun, do the exercises that I tell you. And if you adapt it, and Jews do adapt to the country that they live in, and they do very well when they have a little freedom. And I always say that Jews go with democracy. That's my lesson from all of this. That Jews don't do well when there's any kind of autocratic government, be it communist, be it fascist, be it anything else they do. They're the first ones to go. My mother, who was used to living in a big city, never could really get used to living in the country, but she acted as if she was still in the big city, and right up to the end, 1937, I'll show you the pictures. She was running around in a car that, if I showed it to you today, you'd say, what a beautiful modern car, herself in a yellow cabriolet, you call like an open car, with her in it, and she called our house, Drei-Mädel-Haus, 3 girls' house. She was like a Hollywood show in this village, But she was a character. I mean, but she said, I'll get the nicest car. At least I can do that. I'm not living in a city, and anyway. My father and my mother, they were like, oh God, they couldn't say enough good things about them, And they called them by the most HelgaRemembers. That means you get a title like a doctor, That's usual, but that was usual. That means advisor of commerce, And then Mrs. Advisor of Commerce, and went down to the wife, She didn't have her own profession, but it was a Frau Kommerzienrat, okay.
As Helga's family came from a well-to-do family of Kassel, Germany, they practiced charity and helping others.
And she was called Mutter der Altstadt, Mother of the Old City. And that's how they took care of the poor people. But she didn't just hand out money or hand out goods. She went around to talk to the people. How are you doing? What can I, and not even what can I help you, but, in a very nice way without putting them down, anything, to really, by saying that they're there like a what do you call it, fail safe, if something goes wrong, that she would be there to help.
As Germany entered World War I, many Jews were striving to be accepted and sought to prove their patriotism by fighting for Germany on the front lines.
Well, my father never talked to us about what happened in the First World War. Quiet. Never talked to us what happened to him in Buchenwald in that time that he was there. Nothing. My father, who was in the First World War, and this you'll find many Germans who were in the First World War. No choice, anyway. Do you want to go to war like here? Are you a pacifist? You could, you couldn't say no. And they took my father out of high school yet. So he didn't finish high school, and he was already at war. And so many Germans, and that was not an easy war. They don't show it anymore, but in the trenches, and I don't know what they told them why they're fighting. They fight on the Polish front, and my father was years in the war. And then he was in England in prison for a while because he was one of the chosen special heroes, or whatever you want to call it. So he didn't think, he just didn't believe what was going to happen.
And neither did the other 400,000 German Jews who were proud to hold German citizenship. An estimated 100,000 German Jewish military served in the First World War, and of those, 12,000 were killed in action. Ironically, those same Jewish soldiers who had survived World War I while fighting for Germany, their homeland, would meet their ultimate death in the concentration camps. As the Nazi Party is voted into power in 1933, the fate of all the Jews in Europe is sealed. And those trapped in Germany as Jewish citizens will face the unparalleled anti-Semitic campaign promoted by Goebbels. Beginning in 1937, the government set out to impoverish Jews by requiring them to register their property and then Aryanizing Jewish businesses. This meant that Jewish workers and managers were dismissed, and the ownership of most Jewish businesses was taken over by non-Jewish Germans who bought them at bargain prices. Jewish doctors were forbidden to treat non-Jews, and Jewish lawyers were not permitted to practice law.
No, you knew you had to get out. You couldn't practice in Germany. If you were a doctor, you couldn't see patients. If you were a architect, you couldn't do work. You were out of work. So that rang a bell long before Buchenwald, or Krystalnacht. Buchenwald was one of the camps that you got sent to on Krystalnacht,
Krystalnacht changed the nature of the Nazi persecution of Jews from economic, political, and social to physical with beatings, incarceration, and murder. The event is often referred to as the beginning of the Holocaust.
Germany was probably the most assimilated Jewish community in all of Europe, so that I don't remember the anti-Semitism really until it suddenly was upon us, you know. Everybody knew we were Jewish, and we made no secret. No, it was no secret at all.
At what point did you feel you had to move?
Well, I mean, talk about the first grade, what changed the music, okay? I went to first grade, and you can find it here. The German anthem was Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in der Welt ist Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in der Welt, and so on. It's a beautiful anthem. No more. It was the Hitler marching song, and that was Die Fahne hoch, in Reihen fest geschlossen, SA marschiert, in festen Schritt und Tritt. No, translate that, you know, despite the SA marching, and, you know.
Wow. Far from the hate rallies, book burnings, and anti-Jewish propaganda, Helga's mother found quiet solace in the album, where she was carefully chronicling an enchanted childhood. The Nazis used Children's Leisure Organization and schools to indoctrinate young people in their National Socialist ideology. As the Nazi Party was made compulsory for all teachers, Jewish teachers were fired from their jobs in both the local schools and the universities.
And then you went to school, and you had to say Heil Hitler right away. You know, the desks were all glued to the floor, and a lot of kids in a class. You know, I have 21 kids in a class like here. It's more like 50 in a class, and then the teacher sat on a pedestal, you know, way up above us. So we had to look up to the teacher, you know. His name was Herr Brandt, Mr. Fire. And, you know, it was a nice man, you know, if he let go. But he was going the line. He had to toe the line, you know, and he really did it. I don't know. I still don't. I still think he was forced to act the way he did. So outside this village, on the end of it, on the edge of the village, lived the gypsies, and they lived in wagons, and they had no birth control, and they didn't want birth control either. But they had a child every year, and I'm not kidding, 21 children. And always one would die and another would be born, and this was going on in terrible conditions. And there were two sisters who were in the first grade, gypsy sisters, and they were called up, and there was punishment for them for whatever they did or didn't do. They were very quiet. And the parents were called in, and they had to stand there while he beat them mercilessly with a cane, a real cane, so hard, and my heart was just, everybody was just frightened stiff. And they did not say peep. They were so trained not to show any emotion when they were beaten, and the parents just looked, you know, what did they do in first grade that was required that? I was not beaten because too many people were employed, you see. That didn't work very well. So even though, they knew that I was the only Jew in the class, you know, and then things started to happen. Very quickly.
What happened from one day to the next?
Well, like the Boy Scouts. We used to support the Boy Scouts. They were is the same like over here. They did good deeds. They picked potatoes when harvest time came. They helped the elderly. They did all kinds of wonderful things. And then suddenly they got uniforms, and they started marching to the and was open.
And it wasn't just the marching. It was an intense propaganda campaign, as displayed in the movie Triumph of the Will. Triumph of the Will was a terrifying propaganda spectacle of a huge Nazi rally produced by Leni Riefenstahl and was a preview of what was to come. Between 1933 and 1939, about half of the German Jewish population and more than 2/3 of the Austrian Jews fled Nazi persecution. There were few doors that were open for them.
Like everybody was trying to get out, who wasn't out yet, and nobody would have the Jews. Nobody.
Nobody would help them?
No, and they went to impossible places like where they know how are they going to live. The Philippines. My doctor, they went to the Philippines. They were so far away. You had to go by boat. You can imagine. and it took his whole family, and they went there, and we never saw them again, actually. But as it is, he was suffering from the Japanese later in the Second World War, But
most foreign countries, including the US, Canada, Britain, and France, were unwilling to admit very large numbers of refugees.
The final part where everybody in the world suddenly knew, and every Jew suddenly, no matter how they tried to kid themselves or to not to, that anything would happen to them. Then they knew, and then everybody tried to flee, and nobody could flee anywhere except Israel, really.
Your family tried to flee?
We had tickets to go to Australia. My mother had been to Berlin. My mother was very aware of things because she kept going into the cities. Remember, there's such a difference between the communications, It was different. We had a radio because we had the factory, but not even everybody had a radio in this. And what could you hear? One program, Berlin people were aware, and they did leave. Some of them, remember, one of the reasons we didn't leave is because there was so much of ourselves invested in this area.
Trying to understand the murderous goals of the Nazi regime and the population that supported it is difficult for Helga, especially as a girl having grown up in the elite society that prided itself on their enlightened culture.
Most assimilated of all Jews, of the diaspora. I mean, we were intermarried a lot. We were very German. We didn't have at least that I remember, we didn't have those restrictions that my husband, who was born in Poland, Ukraine, Austria-Hungary, was all of those things, It passed from one to another, the country, so.
According to numerous studies, the final solution should not have come as a surprise to the Germans. The nationwide methodical campaign of presenting the Jews as the vile enemy through the Nuremberg laws, Krystalnacht movies, was aimed at desensitizing the population.
Why is the Holocaust different? Well, people say, well, there was a Holocaust, the Armenian Holocaust. Okay, so they really did, just prior to Second World War, kill every Armenian they could find, every baby, every old person was killed, you know, so this is true. But the question about the Holocaust, you can always say it's a very cultured people. I mean, look, the Germans, what they did what they were as cultured as we had people at that time. They're greats, you know. They're yeah, you know. I mean, I can go through all the people who wrote, you know, Goethe and Schiller.
The Holocaust essentially wiped out the German Jews. Of the roughly 565,000 Jews living in Germany, 160 to 180,000 were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. The rest had managed to flee. It's hard for Helga to understand the careful and deliberate plan of the final solution, the plan that would ultimately wipe out the 6 million Jews of Europe, especially since it was carried out by a cultured civilization.
Movement of the regime were sitting around this table. What were they doing? Why did they have architects there? Because they were building Auschwitz like an architectural city that needed gas chambers to kill to make a final solution that Hitler had said, the final solution being that every Jew would be dead and nobody would discover what these terrible crimes were. And they were sitting planning this, probably playing Mozart and feeding the dogs and everything like that. You know, these normal people, you know, were sitting doing that.
Luckily, Helga and her family were able to get out of Germany before they too were swept up in the final solution. The last German Jewish passengers to successfully escape and find sanctuary in the U.S. sailed from Rotterdam. On the list were Helga and her family. It would be the last boat allowed to land in the U.S. And while grateful for all the opportunities this country has offered, she does have a note of caution.
The Germans were caught by this too. I mean, not many, but many sat quietly, but some of them actively really disagreed with what was happening, okay? I can tell you about that too. How quickly this can happen.
And so ended a German Jewish heritage which went back for generations. Their lives, their homes, their culture was lost, as well as their extended families, and only small fragments of memory, like the treasured album, recall a beautiful life that was cut short.
So there was nobody wanted us. So where was I? Quarter for 1%. But they made Germany, they made Berlin, was an exciting city because of Jews, you know. And there were some families that kept
Between
changing their
1933
religion,
and
like the
1939,
Mendelssohns,
about half
you
of
know,
the
for
German
music.
Jewish
Here they were
population
Jewish, here they
and
were
more
not.
than
Here they were Jewish,
two-thirds
not
of the Austrian
like
Jews
that, you know.
fled Nazi persecution.
But they acted
doors that were open for
no
them.
different than Germans. If they, you know, they owned homes, beautiful homes. They did extremely well, whatever they tried, because they had the freedom to try it, you know.
Most foreign countries, including the US, Canada, Britain, and France, were unwilling to admit very large numbers of refugees.
Why is the Holocaust different? Well, people say, well, there was a Holocaust, the Armenian Holocaust. Okay, so they really did, just prior to Second World War, kill every Armenian they could find, every baby, every old person was killed, you know, so this is true. But the question about the Holocaust, you can always say it's a very cultured people. I mean, look, the Germans, what they did what they were as cultured as we had people of that time. They're greats, you know. They're yeah, you know. I mean, I can go through all the people who wrote, you know, Goethe and Schiller. The thing that sets it apart from everything else that happened. I mean, you see an uncultured people, or one tribe, or an outright rectangular table, and the big shots of the Nazi movement, of the regime, were sitting around this table. What were they doing? Why did they have architects there? Because they were building Auschwitz like an architectural city that needed gas chambers to to make a final solution that Hitler had said, the final solution being that every Jew would be dead and nobody would discover what these terrible crimes were. And they were sitting planning this, probably playing Mozart and feeding the dogs and everything like that. You know, these normal people, you know, were sitting, doing that. Sitting. Very short time. And my father and my mother, they were like, oh God, they couldn't say enough good things about them, you know. And they called them by the most HelgaRemembers. That means you get a title like doctor, you know. That's usual, you know, but that was usual. That means advisor of commerce, you know. And then Mrs. Advisor of Commerce, and went down to the wife, you know. She didn't have her own profession, but it was a Frau Kommerzienrat, okay. The final part where everybody in the world suddenly knew, and every Jew suddenly, no matter how they tried to kid themselves or to not to, you know, that anything would happen to them. Then they knew, and then they knew, and then everybody tried to flee, and nobody could flee anywhere except Israel, really.
Your family tried to
Yes, privileged, as you'd say, Jewish aristocrats, you know? That's why this is so interesting, because you always say that you don't see German Jews dressed like, you don't see Jews dressed the way she is, you know? But that was her everyday dress, this grandmother of mine, on the mother's side, you know?
Did they have nannies and maids?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. The nannies and maids did the work that the machines do for us, you know. And she was called Mutter der Altstadt, mother of the old city. And that's how they took care of the poor people. But she didn't just hand out money or hand out goods. She went around to talk to the people. How are you doing? What can I, you know, and not even what can I help you, but, you know, in a very nice way, without putting them down or anything, to really, by saying that they're there like a what do you call it, fail safe, you know, if something goes wrong, that she would be there to help. Time. And my father and my mother, they were like, oh God, they couldn't say enough good things about them, you know. And they called them by the most HelgaRemembers. That means you get a title like doctor, you know. That's usual, you know, but that was usual. That means
So my father,
advisor of commerce, you know. And then Mrs. Advisor of Commerce, and went down to the wife, you know. She didn't have her own profession, but it was a Frau Kommerzienrat. Okay. What helped? We owned the newspaper in Kassel. The Kasseler Tageblatt was the main newspaper in Kassel. We owned it for a long time. By the area, because he employed everybody. They were all unemployed, and they called him Herr Kommerzienrat. That's in German. You gave a title to some businessman, and then because the wife wasn't going out to work, she was Frau Kommerzienrat, Mrs. Kommerzienrat, which means Miss, literally translated, Miss Business Advisor. As if it would just be transferred like that onto her, you know.